I asked him how he heard about that Jennifer Lopez thing. I had to have my wife explain to me exactly who we were dealing with there, and Jennifer J-Lo, and I thought maybe that's like A-Rod. I don't know, but she left the stage before I got on it. I want to say how grateful I am to be here for the opportunity to speak to you about a case we've got going in California called Vergara versus California that is challenging deeply ingrained flaws in California's public education system. And I want to thank Governor Bush and the Foundation for Excellence in Education for inviting me to participate in this exciting summit. It is really overwhelming and gratifying to see this. The last time Jeb Bush and I were working together, it took 5 weeks and 2 United States Supreme Court decisions to get it all taken care of. Jeb, that was hard, but this is a lot harder. But I think you're going to be successful. Let me tell you a few words about this case that we have pending in California. So all of you are working with educational reform and trying to do the right thing and trying to change a few things. This is litigation, which is a different approach, but it's aimed at the same things. California's public education system has fallen far behind the rest of the nation. I grew up in California, went to California public schools, and when I did, I felt that the California public school system, and my parents believed that it was the best in the nation. A few years back, it's about a couple decades ago now, my son moved out of California to Virginia because he was dissatisfied with the California public school system. He thought it had fallen way behind, and it has. There are many contributing factors, all of which Sacramento, the capital of California, has been unable or unwilling to address. And one significant obstacle that we're concerned about is a handful of outdated laws that prevent school administrators from making teacher employment decisions that are driven by the needs of their students. The premise of our litigation is that every decision that affects the public education system should be made with the interests of students first in mind. What kind of a country are we if we're not thinking about our students first? And you see from that chart that was up there that California's fallen to 47th or so in math, 46th in reading, and so forth. California children, under the California Constitution, have a constitutional right to substantially equal opportunities in learning. The California Constitution and the California Supreme Court have declared the right to education in California is a fundamental right, and students have the right to equality in education. The California Supreme Court has repeatedly recognized this, and the courts exist to protect those fundamental rights. And when they're not being delivered, then it's up to someone to do something about it. And if it can't be fixed in Sacramento, it has to be done. You have to turn to the courts, and Americans have the right to do this because children don't seem to have a seat at the legislative assemblies in our nation's capital, and it's particularly true in California. And we do know who does have a seat in the legislature in California, and they're not concerned enough about the students. As you've already heard from Jeb this morning, from a great speech this morning, studies confirm what students and parents have always known. The key determinant of educational outcomes is teacher quality. The difference between a good teacher and a bad teacher can mean a full year's worth of learning. Students taught by a single ineffective teacher can fall behind their peers and remain stuck below grade level for years. Students taught for two or more consecutive years by ineffective teachers may never recover. Never recover. They never catch up. The long-term effects are dramatic. Students who have avoided ineffective teachers are more likely to attend college, less likely to become pregnant in their teenage years, and earn more money throughout their lifetimes. Replacing a grossly ineffective bottom 5% teacher with an average teacher, not an above average teacher or superior teacher, simply an average teacher, would increase students' cumulative lifetime income by $1.4 million per classroom. Replacing the bottom 5% of teachers nationwide would eliminate the entire educational gap between the United States and top-ranked countries in the world in education. We need to do something about that. Parents know the importance of effective teachers. They see their children suffer when stuck in a classroom with a teacher who doesn't teach. They see depressed students. Their children are depressed. They won't work, and they become problems in various different ways. They will fight, and they have to fight, to have children assigned to better teachers. That's why in a recent survey, 43% of California parents said that removing bad teachers from the classroom is the most pressing challenge facing the California public school system, the most pressing challenge. That is why the school districts throughout the country, but not in California, have begun looking at teacher effectiveness, and we saw some charts today, earlier this morning, in making employment decisions. Recent studies show that there are many ways to measure and predict teacher effectiveness. One recent study by the Gates Foundation, called the Measuring Effective Teachers Project, used a combination of classroom observations, student perception surveys, and student achievement gains. After controlling for the backgrounds and prior achievements of the students in each class, the study was able to predict teacher effectiveness with a high degree of accuracy. But even without statistics, we don't really need the statistics and the models. It will help us in court, but we don't need them, because everyone knows who the worst teachers are. Everyone knows who they are. There is no excuse for leaving those teachers in the classroom year after year after year. The kids know this, the parents know this. Teachers know this, school administrators know this. There's no one who does not know this. Despite the importance of teacher effectiveness, the California Education Code makes it impossible for school districts to make employment decisions based upon teacher effectiveness. Teachers in California earn tenure after 18 months, the shortest probationary period in the nation. 18 months. This is at the first grade level all the way up. And once teachers obtain tenure, it is impossible to dismiss them, no matter how ineffective they are. For example, from 2000 to 2010, the Los Angeles Unified School District spent $3.5 million trying to dismiss 7 teachers. That was 10 years, $3.5 million, in an attempt to dismiss 7 teachers. They succeeded in getting rid of 4. When school districts are forced to lay off teachers for budgetary reasons, the laws require quality-blind layoffs based solely on seniority. This makes no sense. Jeb mentioned this morning, too. The end result is that year after year, the state of California is knowingly placing students in classrooms with ineffective teachers, teachers who can't teach and who should not be teaching. How wrong is that? It's knowing that they know what's happening. In a recent survey, 68% of Los Angeles teachers report that there are ineffective teachers currently working in their schools who should be dismissed for poor performance. And 68% of the school teachers in Los Angeles recognize that there are ineffective teachers right in the next classroom. Even worse, it is kids in the poorest schools that suffer the most under these statutes. The least advantaged children are suffering the most. Because ineffective teachers are impossible to terminate, schools seek to transfer them to other schools. It's called the dance of the lemons. You've probably heard that. Schools that serve the most economically disadvantaged communities are the most difficult to serve and therefore difficult to staff, and therefore have the most vacancies, so the ineffective teachers are transferred to those school districts. Thus, those schools are often forced to accept the teachers that other schools don't want. The end result is a disproportionate number of the system's most ineffective teachers, teachers who would not be in the system if the school districts could fire them, end up teaching the students who are most in need, exacerbating the achievement gap that education is supposed to serve. So the kids who need the help the most are getting the help the least. They're getting the ineffective teachers who are failing for one reason or another year after year. Those kids go back, and you wonder why they don't want to go to class. You wonder why they don't learn. You wonder why they fail tests. Well, we know that one of the most significant reasons is the ineffective teacher that's in that classroom that you can't get rid of. In addition, those same schools are disproportionately affected by the seniority-based layoffs because they have the highest concentration of teachers with the lowest seniority. As one judge in Los Angeles recently found, substantial evidence has shown how budget-based layoffs devastated the teaching corps at struggling Los Angeles Unified School District schools. This turnover and the inability and the instability harms students, mostly minority students, destroying their educational opportunities in violation of that constitutional provision in California that I referred to. So we are perpetuating a system that's devastating to the people that need our help the most in our society. That's devastating to the economy, it's devastating to morale, it's devastating to democracy, it's devastating to the American dream and the American ideal, and we have to do something about it. Now, we can't do anything about it through the legislature in California because it is controlled by the people who have a vested interest in keeping the system as it is. It will not change legislatively. So we have decided, thanks to Dave Welch, who's here today, and a group called Students Matter, to do something about it in court. We have filed a lawsuit which will go to trial on January 27 that challenges just a couple of the provisions that I've been talking about here, the tenure provisions, the seniority first provisions, and the inability to fire ineffective teachers. Before launching this lawsuit, we spoke with school administrators across the state. There is widespread agreement among school officials that the laws we are challenging are harming students and making it impossible to run effective schools. This is why the superintendents of the largest school districts in California agree with the goals of our lawsuit. They are tired of being handcuffed by state laws that were passed at the behest of powerful teachers' unions, which failed to take student needs into account. Like us, they are hopeful that the courts will step in to protect students' rights. Now, we're going to try in this lawsuit to accomplish two things. We're trying to get the courts to agree with us, and we believe that they will, that the constitutional rights of students to a quality education and the constitutional rights of students to an equal quality education are being violated by these provisions that we've been talking about, and they should be stricken down and replaced with measures that make some sense. So we're hoping for a victory in the court aimed at these provisions of law that are guaranteeing that our poorest students receive the poorest teachers. We have got to stop that, and we're hoping that the judiciary will agree with us. The other goal that we have with this litigation is that we hope that the litigation itself will bring a spotlight on these conditions. Education outside the courtroom is an important goal of our litigation. We learned, and we practiced this in the Proposition 8 case that was mentioned by Reg, the civil rights for gay and lesbian citizens in California. We determined at the beginning of that lawsuit that we not only had to win in court, but we had to win in the court of public opinion. We had to use the litigation to help us educate the public about what we were doing to our gay and lesbian brothers and sisters by discriminating against them on the basis of their right to get married. And we spoke out. The people would cover the litigation, and they would ask us what it was about, and then we would explain what it was about, and then more and more attention was focused on the problem, and we felt that winning in court was not enough. We had to win in the court of public opinion so that when we did win in court, then people would say, of course you won in court. That was the right result. That's the right thing, that we accept that as a society. Now, parents know this already, but Californians on a broad scale basis, need to understand how bad this is. I've talked to lots of people, and they have no idea about this tenure business, or no idea how impossible it is to remove teachers that everybody agrees are ineffective. So we're hoping for the opportunity to speak to the American people, particularly the citizens of California, and educate them so that they will then put additional pressure on their members of their state legislature. So that's the case. That's why we're using litigation, which is a pretty rough tool, but sometimes it's effective in complements with the things that other people are doing. Thank you.
Now join us in welcoming former U.S. Secretary of State and Foundation for Excellence in Education board member, Dr. Condoleezza Rice, for a special question and answer session with Ted Olson.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And first of all, let me congratulate this wonderful gathering on all that you do every day to deliver quality education to our kids. Ted, that's a stirring set of remarks that you made. And we were talking at the table. You are someone who believes in the importance of civil and equal rights and the court's role through our Constitution in making sure that every American's rights are protected. Can you talk a little bit philosophically in the broad history of the use of the courts to deliver for people? For instance, Brown versus the Board of Education is what comes to mind for me. How do you see this particular litigation in California within the philosophical history, the philosophical lineage of efforts in education?
That's a very good question. It's very, very important. Over our history, we turn to the courts when public opinion or voting, plebiscites or other measures by our government leaves our minority groups or persons who are less advantaged in a disadvantaged position. Our rights are being denied. Brown versus Board of Education was a very, very good example because it used litigation to force the American people and the courts to recognize how devastating it was to send our children to a school based upon their race. They knew, these students knew, and there was evidence in that case. It was a great use by the lawyers who handled that case to put on evidence to show the psychological damage that was being done. There's another great case that came out of the state of Virginia, where I now live, called Loving versus Virginia. At that point, this was 1967, at that point 16 states still made it against the law to marry someone of a different race. In the Loving case itself, the couples that wished to get married would have been guilty of a felony if they'd have been married. Our president's parents, if they'd have been married in Virginia, and the Supreme Court struck that down. The evidence in that court was compelling, but the other part that was so compelling was the fact that the public realized. Now people think that could never have been the case in America, but it was, and it took the courts to fix it.
Right, I think this is an important point because one question that comes up is, shouldn't this be in the legislature? Isn't that the normal course, and isn't that appropriate? And so using the courts in this way has a long history in our country.
It does, and during our Proposition 8 case, the judge said, a very, very good judge said to us during one of the hearings, said, why should I get involved here? The people of California, 52 to 48% have put this in the Constitution that only marriage between a man and a woman will be recognized in California. Why should I interfere? And my answer to the judge, and he knew it was coming, was I said, that's why you are there. That's why we have courts. That's why we have an independent judiciary. Because when the popular will not respond to the rights, constitutional rights of our citizens, we come to the courts, and that's why we came here.
Ted, when you argue this case, one of the most compelling things about the data is that, as you said, the kids who most need help are the ones who are most punished by these circumstances. I myself was not aware, I'm a Californian and very interested in education reform, but not aware the degree to which the schools that are already the poorest performing are the ones that are, the circumstances are most exacerbated by these particular teacher employment obligations. Can you talk a little bit about disparate impact and how you want to talk about the effect on minority kids, on poor kids.
Don't we want in this, and you know this, but we want in this country all of our citizens to be successful. It's good for our economy. It's good for our neighborhoods. We have teen pregnancies because kids aren't getting a good education. We have people out of jobs because they don't have a good education. People resort to crime. I mean, it is good for all of us to have this, but when we take the least advantaged people in wealthy communities, the ones surrounding Stanford, where I grew up and where you spend a lot of your time, they can afford to augment the education. People in other parts of poor parts of California, and that's all over in the Central Valley and Los Angeles and areas like that, those kids don't have a chance. And we've sentenced them to a life of poverty and inequality, and that's devastating to all of us for all the reasons that we think that this is a great country. If we wanted to be purely selfish about it, how much damage we're doing to our economy by taking, Jeb said this morning, and we all know this, kids want to learn, kids can learn, and they want the opportunity to learn. If we deprive them of that ability, they'll never be successful, and they'll know that, and they'll turn against society.
It's striking to me that anybody has an argument against doing away with these provisions. Just to give you an example, people talk about tenure, and they have in mind, well, you do tenure in universities. At Stanford, about 32% of the people who come up for tenure actually get it, and that doesn't count all the people who didn't come up. And by the way, it is a 7-year process of evaluation before you get tenure. 18 months, cursory evaluation, and you're suddenly tenured within the system. How do people defend that when you talk to them?
They defend it because they say they defend it by not defending it. Our opponents in this case aren't defending it. They're saying that teachers aren't that important. They're accusing us of being anti-teacher. We say that we're being pro-student. What profession would say that 100% of members of our profession are all successful? No profession would say that. In the legal profession, we have the Bar Association that try to root out people that we know are bad lawyers or incompetent lawyers or dishonest lawyers. The teachers are saying it has nothing to do with it, and you're against teachers. They're not really answering the argument. There's no way that, I'm sort of against tenure anyway in a lot of different circumstances. I've been practicing law with the law firm for pretty nearly 50 years. We don't have tenure. I have to go through scrutiny every single year, and if I can't cut it, then I should be out. So what in the world are we giving second grade teachers tenure after 18 months when we haven't had a chance to evaluate them, and once we do, we can't get rid of them? It is madness, but it is striking, Condi, that our opposition is basically going on the offense and saying you're against teachers. We're not against teachers. We think that they are the most important thing, and that's why we have to have good teachers.
And let me just get you to repeat something you just said. They say, well, in truth, all of our teachers are good and they don't matter anyway. That's the argument?
That is basically it. Now, yeah. I've oversimplified, but not much.
Yeah.
But not much. Because they're not saying, they're basically denying the idea that there are a substantial number of ineffective failed teachers. And how they could deny that, it's reasonable, it's unreasonable. But in a sense, that's what they're saying. But they're also saying, well, you're exaggerating how important it is. At the same time, they're saying we're anti-teacher.
Right. Have you heard from teachers? Are there teachers out there who support this? We were listening in the board meeting to some discussion of the Common Core and the fact that teachers are actually very excited about the idea of having a chance to work with national standards, not national curriculum, with national standards. Very often, if you're a teacher and you're a good teacher, and you know the teacher in the next classroom is not a good teacher, that's a kind of reflection on you. So do you hear from teachers? Or
yes, we have heard from teachers. They often don't want to be identified because they will be subjected to significant pressure by the unions. And the other thing, you said it's a bad reflection on teacher in classroom A if there's a teacher in classroom B. But how do the good teachers care about the students? Yeah. And the compassion for teachers, for the students in the next classroom, they want to do something about that. And so there's a huge number of people who are silently supporting this because it's not good for teachers, and it's not good for the people that they care about the most, which are their students.
Right. Say a little bit about the people who are bringing suit. The students, their parents, the organization. We know David Welch's very fine work. A little bit about how you see, we were talking also at the table that during the Proposition 8 work, the thing that really you're passionate about, and I could see it in your eyes, is we have a tendency to talk about this in a kind of institutional, clinical way, but these are real people whose lives are at stake here, and we're talking about real parents and real kids who've taken a really pretty big step here to take it to the courts on behalf of a lot of kids and parents.
Yes, and I'm glad you asked that question, because that's what it's all about. We kept telling the plaintiffs in our Proposition 8 case, lawyers have a tendency to see their clients as pieces on a chessboard. I mean, they're a game, and they're trying to win the game, and they can, but we're thinking, and we constantly reassured the people we were representing in that case, we know we represent you. And the most powerful evidence in our case were the plaintiffs putting on their own testimony, talking about what it was like to be gay, what it was like to come out, what it was like to be told that their relationships didn't matter. We have the same thing here. Now we have to approach it differently because we're talking about young people, but we're talking about young people and parents, and that's where we're going to win this kind of case, when people realize that there are actual individuals there who can't get ahead or are being sentenced to second-class status in society because they can't be educated. So when people realize, and that's part of our job, it's a difficult thing with young people, and anybody that's involved in a lawsuit knows that there's a lot of pressure there, and it's a difficult situation. So, but that is the exact point. We have to make this understood that these are individual people, that we have a responsibility in society to give them the opportunities that we've promised.
Dad, how will you get the message out? You talked about the importance of the social environment, and I've always felt that, look, when you change laws like this, people have a tendency to come along, but you do want it to be acceptable to the population of California. You want it to be acceptable to the teachers, that these changes are being made. What is the education effort like around this lawsuit?
Well, one of the things you learn is that you've got to be, first of all, your voice has to be heard. The lawsuit itself will cause members of the press, the media, saying, what are you up to? What are you doing? Explain yourself. That will give us an opportunity. Then we have to thoughtfully explain it, that we're not against teachers, we're for teachers, we're for individuals who want to teach students. We really want to exalt the fact that good teachers make all the difference in the world. And we're going to have to repeat that message over and over again, but we can't do it ourselves. We have to recruit educators, members of the public, those of you in this room or others like you in California that are going to resonate with what we say, because people don't get it the first time or they'll forget it. You have to repeat it over and over again, but you can't say the same person saying the same thing over and over again. That doesn't work. You have to have lots of voices coming together in all the media that you can bring to bear on this. So you have to look at this as a holistic project, trying to find where all your allies are, and they're all over the place in this battle, it seems to me, and to bring all of that to bear, and then make people, as my mother said about our Proposition 8 case, if people listen to you, you will win.
As a Californian, we used to think of ourselves, I've lived in California now for over 30 years, and we always thought of ourselves as ahead of the curve. California was always leading the nation in fill in the blank. I'm beginning to think these days California is more like the canary in the mine. We are actually evidence of what's happening elsewhere. Can you talk a little bit about the relationship of what's going on in California with this lawsuit, with these work rules, these employment rules? What does the landscape look like nationally? And do you see this as something that, if you win in California, can have national impact? California has certain rights guaranteed on education in the Constitution that are not guaranteed everywhere. So can you talk about the impact of this California case on the national picture?
Right, that's a very good point. California's constitution is different, where there was California Supreme Court decisions that stress the right of the obligation of courts to enforce those rights. The constitutions in other states are different, court decisions are different. But we are seeing, as we heard this morning, states like Massachusetts and Florida and other states are all way ahead of what's happening in California. One of those charts that we threw up, it shows California getting an F, in education. As someone, I got to California when I was 8 years old, so I lived there for a long time and went to public schools, and I have enormous admiration for California and the spirit of the 49ers, the beautiful seacoast and the beautiful mountains and the entrepreneurial spirit in Silicon Valley and the building of the aircraft industry and the entertainment industry, which is the envy of the world. Why should California be descending to last in education in this country? It's a tragedy. And the point that you make with respect to what effect will it be, we hope that the effect will be other states or other lawyers in other states and other people working together will figure out a way. Maybe their state is different, but that means just maybe if you can take the concept of we can draw attention to the fact that we must help these students, and we're not doing it, and each day that goes by, we're causing irreparable damage to millions of our citizens and potential voters and people that would participate. So if people get focused on this, and there's going to have to, that's the job of lawyers, so to speak. We try to figure out what is the way to solve this particular problem. What is the way to make people see it in the light that will help us succeed? Mm-hmm. So we hope that we'll sort of start a little bit of a snowball effect throughout the country, but we're having to catch up with what's going on in other places.
And Ted, we can see your passion about this, and so I've got a couple of last questions for you. First of all, when the decision comes down, what do you hope that it says? What would be really success here? And secondly, talk about your own personal passion. You could be doing a lot of things with your life, but you're out in California on this very important case.
Well, what we hope from the court decision is we hope that a judge at the Superior Court level, which is the basic level of the California justice system, and then there's an intermediate appellate court, then the Supreme Court. What we hope is a ringing endorsement of the rights of students, repeating what the California Supreme Court has said about the rights of students to a quality education and equality in education, and articulating the damage that's being done by these things that we're attacking, because these aren't the only things that are wrong. I mean, we decided to go after some of the worst things because we could want to get things started. But if people realize that the judges, independent of any political part of this thing, are looking at this and saying, this is awful, something has to be done about it, that's what we're hoping for, and striking down those provisions that are such a barrier to a quality education in California. Why am I doing this? I would hope that, I suspect I'm doing this for the same reason you're doing what you're doing and everybody in this room is doing it, because we care about the most vulnerable in our society, and we realize that education is the #1 priority for this country. If we continue to want to talk about how great we are, we want to talk about our constitutional rights, and why we are proud to be Americans, we better all want to do something about this. And if I can do a little bit, I'm grateful for the opportunity.
Well said. Thank you for your dedication to this, and we all wish you very well. We'll have our fingers crossed and our prayers upward. Thank you very much.